Ominjaga. I'm recording this short presentation from the unceded land of the Wurundjeri people in Woi Wurrung language. This land used to be known as Na, but the British Empire invaded and registered it as Melbourne on the cluster of islands now known as Australia. For Pacifica natives, I'm at one of the edges of Temwana Nui Akiwa, Temwana Nui, the Big Sea. I was invited to this land by a theological school and a church that came with the colonial project. So I'm a beneficiary of colonization. Colonization is what brought the mission and the missionaries and their teachings and institutions to this land. I'm not proud of this connection, but I acknowledge that this is where I am located, physically, ideologically, and theologically. This is a revision or a short version of a presentation made at SBL 2021, where a panel was invited to respond to the address by Adele Reinhardt as the 2020 president of SBL. And I was invited to respond to the panel, respond to the responses. And the panel included Jean-Pierre, Louise, Ekaputra Tupamahu, Samaria Divine, and Carrie Whipple. So I responded to responses. And this presentation therefore embodies the practice of talanoa. Talanoa, I will explain that later for those of you who are not familiar with it. Talanoa is a key characteristic of my own work. I decided to record this so that I can use this clip in workshops and classes where I talk about going native. This is part of a longer project on restoring biblical studies from Oceania. And that longer project encourages engagement with native wisdom, native readings, native scriptures. I titled this presentation, Flipping the Table, Flipping at the Table. And I use flipping for the practice of chutzpah that Adele advocated in her address. There are other terms for chutzpah that she used. One of those terms is sass in womanist criticism. And Ekaputra's response, in his response, Ekaputra introduced a Indonesian term, niaut. So chutzpah, niaut, connotations of what I refer to as flipping. And I use table for what Ekaputra calls a whitewashing machine. So the table and whitewashing machine refer to, in this presentation, they refer to tools and manifestations of coloniality, which includes the academy, the church, the state, the market, and other colonizing institutions. I offer my talanoa around two artworks from Oceania. First, from North Oceania, this 2008 work by Filipino artist and activist Emmanuel Garibay. He goes by Manny, in its title, Melugar ba sa mesa. Manny brings Filipinx figures to the table, sa mesa, and places political and community leaders at the top side of the table, away from the viewer. At the center of the work is a Pinocchio-like character who points with himself with his left hand and holds a dagger with his right hand, while he's being hugged by a winking female character holding a red telephone, which the red phone symbolizes someone with authority. Many teases viewers to imagine this table as the one at the Last Supper, in which case Jesus is a long-nosed joker who has political and international authority, and any of the figures crowding the high side of the table could be Judas. The second work is from South Oceania by the New Zealand-born Samoan artist Greg Semu, whose 2010 work titled The Last Cannibal Supper Before We Become Christians is confronting in many ways. At the table are, to borrow or in the spirit of Marcella Alco's read, at the table are indecent bodies, exposed bodies, black bodies, brown bodies, women bodies, and there is a tattooed body at the center of the table representing Jesus. In this work, Semu obviously flips at the table at the Passion narrative. There is a pig in both works. Many and Semu are unafraid to transgress sacred traditions. The Jewish Passover is defiled by the pig, and a pig becoming the body of Christ defiles the Christian Eucharist. Both works are examples of flipping at the table. Many's pig is roasted Filipino style, and Semu's pig has been cooked in an earth oven, what we call umu, Pacifica style. In my watering mouth, both tables befit being announced as the Lord's table. I would appreciate such tables and call it divine. And it's at such tables that I would expect to receive more than a wafer or a morsel of bread. Under and in front of Manny's table, on the side of and closer to the viewer, are rebels, protesters, mourners, survivors of state violence, parents of victims. They are normal people who do not have a place at the table. And this is one of the critical points of this work, as suggested by its title. Me lugar sa mesa translates as a request. Place me at the table. Many horns viewers with the faces and voices of subjects who do not have a place at the table, at the Lord's table, at the Master's table. An easily overlooked figure in Manny's work is the open-mouthed man with a missing tooth wearing a worn-out V-neck t-shirt in front of the table to the right. The stigmata are on the hand of this man. He represents Christ resurrected. And together with the normal people under the table, he too asks, Me lugar sa mesa, place me at the table. Manny and Semu embody the story of many minoritized members of the Society of Biblical Literature and of other whitewashing machines. We do not have a place at the table, and chutzpah, Adele's term, and niaut, Ekaputra's term, are inspirations for us to flip at the table. But is it worth our effort? Why bother if only our kind of people listen to us and only a few understand what we say? Many of our own people have been whitewashed, so why bother if the Black and minoritized leaders of our communities, like the Latino Archbishop of Los Angeles discussed by Jean-Pierre in his response, they sit at the Master's table and forget about us. They sit at the Lord's table and don't give an F about Native people, Black people, New Yorkers, migrants, rainbow people, and other minorities. Manny and Semu bring people who look like me to the table and raise a critical question of foreign and native leaders who condemn our kind of people because they see our people as cannibals. At the Lord's table, who are the cannibals? Did we stop being cannibals when we became Christians? Or did we become a different kind of cannibals as we break and eat the body of Christ and then wash it down with the blood of Christ? What happens when we approach the Eucharist table or when we attend the Society of Biblical Literature meetings? What do we do, as Samaria asks in her response? What do we do when we leave SBL meetings? Do we continue flipping at the table, or do we go back to our communities and pay our respect and our dues to authorities who tell us that this way, which means their way, is the only way? Why should the way of white straight men be the only approved way? That was a question that Carrie asked. More importantly, what do we do so that chutzpah and yaut, queering and other indecent ways of reading become fine enough to be on the table? What do we do so that wisdom and courage of Native artists and activists like Manny and Semu become acceptable at the Lord's table? How do we stop the whitewashing machines in the academy, in the church, in the society, and in other so-called civil and public spaces? The many questions in this presentation are invitations for talanoa. And talanoa is a term used in many, but not all of the islands in Southern Oceania. And the term has three basic meanings: story, telling, conversation. A story that you have, that story is talanoa. When you tell a story, the process of telling is talanoa. And when you have conversation with your colleagues, your friends, or your critics, that conversation is also talanoa. So one term has three meanings. I want to highlight in this presentation, to close this presentation, two elements. First, that talanoa is a practice and a way of thinking rather than a theory or concept. Talanoa is a way of being. It's a way of being that forms us. And this applies to natives and non-natives because we are all involved in talanoa. Second, flipping can take place at all three dimensions of talanoa. A story may flip another story, or may flip at another story, another text, another telling, another conversation. A telling may flip another telling, or flip at another telling, another story, another conversation. And a conversation may flip other stories, may flip at other stories, tellings, or conversations. Talanoa is not naive, innocent, or disinterested. Talanoa is us, and we are talanoa. Leva leva malanga, kau tatawat.